The AP poll dropped today for the preseason, and we are going to react to it. Ohio State checks in at number one for the first time since 2015. Grant, the Buckeyes will start the season at the top of both polls, the AP and the coaches' polls. Welcome into Buckeye Cadence, the heartbeat of Ohio State athletics. My name is Blake Biscardi, Grant Kincaid joining again. So, Grant, we saw the AP poll today, 9 SEC teams, but 8 from the Big Ten, the two conferences that lead college football. But no SEC teams, Grant, got a first place vote. No SEC teams got a first place vote. Ohio State and Oregon will top the poll. When you first saw this come out today around noon Eastern, what was your reaction seeing one, that Ohio State was at the top, but then two, that not one SEC team earned a first place vote?
Well, it's always a surprise when not a single Georgia or Alabama or LSU can receive a single vote for something like that. I'm sure SEC fans would tell you, oh, it's just because we cannibalize each other and we're so deep and yada, yada, yada. But I think it just comes down to the fact that, we were talking about earlier, Georgia, that's the one team where you probably saw it with this year. But even them, they have 8 returning starters. Georgia does on defense, but what are they going to do on offense? So I think that AP voters realize that, yeah, there might be a lot of good teams, but we don't know if there's that one really great team in the SEC right now.
Yeah, it shows you that there's more top heavy in the Big Ten because they've got the premier teams right now. You're looking at that poll, it's Ohio State and Oregon right up there at the top, and then Indiana sitting there at 6, the defending national champions. Grant, too, before we even get into Ohio State and breaking down this poll, you see the defending champs at 6. Now, do you think that there's still a little bit of brand bias here for Kirk Cignetti and the Hoosiers? Do you think that's a fair ranking given the teams that are ranked ahead of them and then the turnover that Indiana had? Now they're also replacing Fernando Mendoza, the Heisman Trophy winner, with Josh Hoover. There's some question marks about what he will be in that offense. So when you see Indiana at 6, is that something to you that you're like, okay, the national champion from a year ago should start the season number one until someone dethrones them? Do you think you should wipe it clean every single year? Like, where are you at when you see the defending champs ranked at 6, not even inside the top 3 or 5?
Well, I think every year in college football is so different, especially nowadays. And Indiana is no exception, especially with the way that they run their program. They're very portal heavy, especially right now. Like you said, they're replacing a lot of guys, including the number one overall pick. So it's not like Indiana can just reload and be a top 3 team, and everyone just has to accept it. I think when there's a lot of turnover, no matter who it is, it's hard to put that team confidently in that 1, 2, or 3 spot. Maybe you could say that Indiana deserves to be in the top 5, but I think if you're a Hoosiers fan, you're not going to complain about being the preseason number 6 team in the country the year after winning the national championship.
So let's just remind everybody of the top 6 teams really quick. Ohio State number 1, Oregon at 2, Georgia checking in at 3, followed by Notre Dame at 4. Then you have Texas rounding out the top 5 with Indiana sitting right outside. They'll also be followed by Miami, which we'll get into in a little bit. But Grant, let's go Ohio State here. We are an Ohio State show, so we're going to talk about the Buckeyes first. This is the first time that they are starting the season ranked number 1 since 2015. But Grant, all I'm hearing from the national media is Ohio State has lost so many draft picks to the NFL. How are they going to replace all that defensive talent? Yes, I hear about Julian Sain, and yes, I hear about Jeremiah Smith, but there's a lot that Ohio State has lost, so I've been told. And while that's true, Ohio State's lost that much, Grant, 25 NFL draft picks in the last 2 seasons, and you're telling me that this team is still good enough to begin the year at number 1? I mean, just think about what other program can say that all those things have happened, yet still the voters think that this team is good enough and is the number 1 team in the country going into the 2026 season, despite just having 4 draft picks in the top 11 a year ago. Like, what could this defense be? Yet they're still ranked number 1. So just talk about Ohio State for a little bit. How can they have the trust of the voters? What do you think it was about the Buckeyes that all these voters got together and said, okay, this is the number 1 team in the country? And now that's happened between the press and also the coaches. So Ohio State number one, why?
Well, I think it is it's a credit to the way that Ryan Day has run his program, especially the last few years. The model of consistency and the way that the vast majority of the time Ohio State handles their business. Now, I wouldn't disagree if someone said, "Well, look at the way that Ohio State ended last year on top of all that loss." How do you say that this team is clear cut number one? I definitely understand where you'd be coming from, but I also don't think that you can undersell Julian Sain and Jeremiah Smith coming back together. That's a huge deal. And regardless of who's under Jeremiah, we Ohio State has proven that wide receivers, they can develop them, they can find ways to make them dependable number twos. They have guys like Chris Henry Jr. and waiting in the wings, just who sounds like he's going to get playing time this year. So I think you look at that, you look at returning offensive linemen, you look at who they got in the portal. Very, very good defensive portal class for Ohio State. I think that is probably the biggest reason why. And then voters look at Matt Patricia. That's the defensive coordinator that we're questioning. I don't, I think that the coaching staff between Art and Day and Patricia, along with the acquired talent, I think that's at the end of the day what voters saw and put Ohio State number one.
Grant, let's unpack everything that you just said there. And I want to start at the end of what you said, talking about Ryan Day, Arthur Smith, and Matt Patricia. Now, you see those three, and you can look at it and say, okay, that might be the top head coach coordinator combination in the country. Now, there are some programs that have some really good ones, but Ohio State is near or at the top of the list there. And Grant, going right alongside that, I think what you have to see is that Ohio State has now earned the trust of the voters. They've earned the trust of other coaches, and just in general as fans, that's the standard. Now, the standard at Ohio State has never changed. This is always what it's been. But Ryan Day still had to prove that he could uphold that standard. He now won a national championship. We saw what they were able to do last year. Yes, a disappointing end to the season, but you still see the caliber of team that Ohio State put together, again, despite all the draft picks that they lost. But the difference, Grant, I think, between last year's team and this year's team, and why there's the trust and the belief in the Buckeyes here without even seeing a single snap played yet, is, yes, all the returning production that they have on the offensive side of the ball. Ryan Day being in his 8th season, Matt Patricia returning on defense, total continuity across the board on the defensive staff. And then all the talent that they brought in, which you touched on from the transfer portal. Dominic Kelly, Earl Little, Terry Moore, these guys like John Walker, Christian Allegro, who are going to be impact players on this defense, paired with the returning talent, paired with the recruits that they brought in because they recruit at a high level. And then you take all that and you say, wait a second, this team also added a former NFL head coach and offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith to Julian Sain and Jeremiah Smith, who are returning now for their second year as a starter and their third year as a starter. And then you put all that together in a bowl and you say, wow, this is what Ohio State is going to be. And then you even look into last year with Brian Hartline. Yes, elite recruiter, elite wide receiver developer, number one in the country in both of those areas. But as a play caller, he's got to grow as a first-time play caller. So if Arthur Smith was the offensive coordinator for the Buckeyes last year, does that change what happens to Ohio State? Do they win a national title? But now on that offense, we actually get to see what would have happened now because that offense ages a year. Bo Jackson is not a freshman anymore at running back. Isaiah West, same thing. And you're adding all this veteran presence to this offense because they all age a year and they have all played together. Aside from Devin McHugh and Kyle Parker at wide receiver, Grant, this entire offense has played together. Mm-hmm. And I think it has the potential to be one of the scariest units in the country. And I think that's where some of that belief comes into play for Ohio State, too, just on the offensive side of the ball. But then defensively, when you look at the Buckeyes, talk about the impact that Christian Allegro, you had a piece go out on the linebackers earlier. Just talk about the impact of having a guy like Christian Allegro, and then even John Walker into that front seven, James Smith, Quay Rusall, these guys that are going to contribute close to the line of scrimmage where Ohio State lost 3 players in that front 7 in the NFL draft as high draft picks. So talk about the impacts that those transfers are going to have on that defense, that have you believing, that have me believing, and then obviously coaches and media alike around the country.
Well, I think you start with Allegro, and something that James Laurinaitis has been on record talking about is, he watched the tape of the Alabama game and the game that Wisconsin played Ohio State, and he really liked what he saw from Allegro, from the highest level competition you could possibly face in college football. So, from an instinctual standpoint, and from, a physical frame, you wouldn't expect him to be as big as he is. He's a really big guy. There's a reason why they have him possibly, rushing the passer and getting in the backfield on top of being able to be a signal caller and a ball hawk. So I think he's a super versatile guy. He's experienced. You'd like to think that he's been leveled up a little bit with, Mick Mariotti and the staff throughout the offseason. So I think you're confident there. You're confident in Peyton Pierce. He's been in the program long enough. He's gotten his feet wet on the field. He has been, with Matt Patricia for a full year. So I think, you have to be pretty confident in what Peyton Pierce can do, especially as a run stopper. He's probably the best on the team at that, at that position. So from that pair, I think you're looking good, especially because we've talked about the depth of the linebacker room with TJ Alford and Riley Pettijohn, guys that are super athletic and have endless potential that will probably be coming in and out of the game on any given snap. So that unit is in pretty good shape. I think when you get to the line, there's a little bit more of what are we going to see snap to snap, drive to drive, because John Walker seems like a dependable guy up the middle, especially in run stopping. I think that's his bread and butter. It's what Ryan Day has talked about him being best at. But you have a guy like James Smith coming in, who Ohio State is going to be depending on a lot. And I'm not to say that he can't do it, but they're pushing him. They're expecting him to take a leap and become an elite rusher. Every single snap, basically, they want him to use his explosiveness as much as he possibly can. And it looks like Ohio State, between James Smith and Edric Houston, there's going to be a lot of inside pressure. There's going to be a lot of pockets collapsing in on quarterbacks, which bodes well for the guys that we just talked about, and as far as the linebackers go. So I think between that and then having Quay Rousseau and that hybrid linebacker position, give them some options, be able to read the play, and help guys out, around the front 7. I think you have to be pretty confident with the experience and the overall potential of everyone in the front 7 right now.
Yeah, Grant, and the biggest difference that I'm hearing and what you're talking about with the defense versus what I was talking about with the offense is this offense has all played together before, and they have that continuity there. And you're mentioning all the experience on the defensive side of the ball, but they haven't all played together. Mm-hmm. So that question is, yes, you have a great pool of talent right there to use, and Matt Patricia is going to maximize that. But this team just has to gel. They have to come together. Now, they need that to happen by week 2, which is why the emphasis and the urgency are there in fall camp, which you've referenced, I've referenced. Then you hear Coach Day talk about it every time he has an opportunity, that how important camp is. Same thing with Matt Patricia, because they know in week 2 they're headed down to Austin, Texas for a primetime game, which is now an official top 5 matchup, as number 1 Ohio State will travel to number 5 Texas. But then, Grant, you look to the backside of this defense, and you've got Earl Little, and you've got Terry Moore, and you've also got Jalen McLean. You've got Jay Timmons mixed into that group, Jermaine Matthews, Devin Sanchez. What about the secondary stands out to you, and what about the secondary is it that is causing people to trust the back end of this Ohio State defense from what you saw in practice versus what we know on paper and what we're hearing around the program?
Well, Moore, that's another place where Ohio State acquired plenty of experienced talent between, Earl Little and Terry Moore and Dominic Kelly, the guys from, big time programs that made impacts or at least saw regular playing time. I think that's when you realize, you throw Jay Timmons into the mix, this guy who has come out of left field since spring, and all of a sudden Ryan Day has, clamoring on about him in his press conference. So it's a little bit like the linebacker room where you have all this depth, all these guys that you've both developed and then brought in. These are just so many chess pieces for Matt Patricia to work with. And I know we've talked about the do your job mentality, but he has these guys with excellent skill sets. And the way the secondary is showing up, obviously it looks like Earl Little, Jalen McClain in the back end, but we talked about Earl Little being able to move around, play some nickel back. So brings Terry Moore into the mix at that point. And then Jay Timmons and Dom Kelly, they're going to be duking it out for that cornerback, that second cornerback spot. And they're both, obviously Jay Timmons has been a little bit of admiration this year, but Dom Kelly's been right there with him, overall. So it's going to be exciting to see what actually shakes out in the cornerback room specifically.
The Buckeyes will be able to be multiple there, Grant, and there's going to be packages again, like we've talked about before. Matt Patricia told us the other day that they're going to be able to put 3 linebackers on the field. They're going to be able to put on the field 5 defensive backs, sometimes 3 safeties. It's going to depend. There's a lot of different variety for the Buckeyes to use on that defensive front. But Grant, as we continue to break down this and react to the AP poll that came out on Monday, let's take a quick pause and remind everybody of the event we have coming up at Tailgate Takeover. That is at Dick's House of Sport in Polaris, Ohio. Less than 2 weeks away. Again, Saturday, August 29th from 12 to 3 p.m. Dick's House of Sport in Polaris, Ohio. You are invited. Join us for Tailgate Takeover. This is going to be an event to kick off football season. It's in the air. It's here. We are just days away from kicking off. We've got week 0 games here in a few days, and then we are finally going to see Ohio State football on September 5th. But we're going to kick that off. It's going to be a big celebration. Brandon Bowen is going to join us again, a great friend of the program. All of your tailgate favorites are going to be here at this event. Dick's House of Sport has you covered from the tailgate to the seat. Get you geared up for football season. There's going to be giveaways, a ton of fun. This is a family event, and TSB Live is going to be broadcast right from the store at the event. We cannot wait to meet all of you guys in person. There's a QR code on your screen if you're watching. If you're listening on podcast, this will be linked in the show description. Go ahead and register just so we know that you're coming. But again, this event is totally free, and we cannot wait to see you guys there and break down and kick off the Ohio State football season as the 2026 Buckeyes prepare to take the field. But Grant, let's continue on in this poll. We've got Oregon at number 2, and then you're looking at Georgia 3, Notre Dame 4, Texas 5. Was there a surprise to you seeing that top 5 come across the board? I think, to me, when I think about one, preseason polls, you don't want to overreact to, for one. But they give you a lot of talking points in August. But when I look around college football and I'm looking at, okay, let's predict my playoff bracket, who I think can win a national title, what teams I think can make the playoff, I've got it down to, I think, about 6. That article will be out in the coming days with my official predictions here. But I've got it to about 6 teams. And I pretty much agree with this top 7. I would shuffle around the teams a little bit. But did you see any surprises in that top 5 specifically? Maybe you thought a different team would check in at number 1 instead of the Buckeyes. Like, what was your reaction there seeing those top 5 of Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Notre Dame, and then Texas?
Oh, I think it was pretty fair. I always saw Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame in that mix. Obviously, Texas with everything they have coming back and Cam Coleman and everything. I think when you see Georgia come into the picture at 3, I was a little bit surprised. I thought Notre Dame was a pretty confident top 3 team, especially with what they've acquired and come back with. But other than that, I think it's pretty fair. The top 5 at least. I think obviously it surprised some people to have us at 1 instead of Oregon. I think that's a coin flip this year. But other than that, I think it's a pretty fair top 5.
Oregon's an interesting team to break down because, Grant, they're going to be one of the most veteran teams in the entire country. That defensive line is going to be feared and revered. But Dante Moore back at quarterback, you got DeCarry Moore, you have got Evan Stewart. Lots of talent across the board on both sides of the ball. Again, Dan Lanning doing a great job. But here's the thing, Grant. Both coordinators are gone for Oregon. They've got to replace both coordinators. And I guess what this is potentially telling you is if you compare Oregon and Ohio State here together, Ohio State's coordinators are better than Oregon's coordinators. And the talent is similar. Experience is similar. Oregon and Ohio State edging each other out in various categories, but maybe it was the coordinator combinations there that edged out the Buckeyes over top of the Ducks. Do you think that's a factor there? Because it is tough to replace both coordinators in any given year, but I think what's going to help the Ducks is all of the experience and the continuity that they do return from a year ago.
Uh, that is, that is the deepest team by far in the country. I think you look top to bottom, there's hardly any holes on Oregon. And, Dante Moore is obviously a huge piece coming back for them. So it is, that's why I think it was a coin flip between the two teams, because you look at Oregon, especially all off season, and you're like, what did they really lose? What have they really dropped? What did they struggle with last year, the most? And there wasn't a lot for you to poke holes, with Oregon. So at the end of the day, Oregon, Ohio State, it's going to be settled eventually. But that's a great team. We picked games earlier, a couple weeks ago, and we got to the Oregon game, and it's like, I mean, anything can happen because we know exactly what that team is capable of. And when Dan Lanning is able to motivate a great team, who knows? Who knows what could happen?
Yeah, it's a heavyweight bout. It's good on good between both of those teams. And Ohio State has to play 6 of these currently ranked teams to begin the preseason on its schedule this year. The biggest game is against Texas. Grant, let's talk about the Longhorns really quickly. Are you surprised that they're sitting down at 5? There's a ton of talent on this roster. Will Muschamp is coming in as the defensive coordinator for Texas. Arch Manning returns. Cam Coleman slides in from Auburn. Ryan Wingo still out there as a wide receiver, so that's a great duo. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Colin Simmons is leading a fired-up defensive line. Those guys are hungry, but they have a big game problem. Do they really have a big game problem? Is that what we're going to talk about here with Texas? Do you think that could be the thing, that they need to see it to believe it from the Longhorns, because they're 0-2 against Ohio State? They're unable to take care of Georgia in the SEC championship games. They've not been able to advance to a national title, losing in the semifinal twice under Sarkisian. What is it about Texas that you see sets them at 5? Do you think these 4 teams are better than Texas, or maybe this approach with Texas has to do with their inability to consistently win the big games when they matter the most?
I do think people just need to see it from Texas. You mentioned, I mean, half a dozen huge games that they've dropped very recently. Putting them as a team that can win a lot of regular season games, but hasn't proved that they're a true national title contender. With Arch Manning at the helm, especially, there's a lot more question marks. So I think it is something when you look at Notre Dame and Georgia and Oregon, and you've seen them in those spots, maybe Oregon falls under kind of the same category, but the amount of talent they have back, it's just something way different than Texas is dealing with. So I think people just, until they see it from Texas, until they know that Texas is that top 2 or 3 team, they're gonna, especially preseason, they're gonna be weary after last year ranking Texas number 1.
Grant, another team that might have a big game problem, and again, I don't think it's as bad, but Notre Dame, CJ Carr at quarterback. There's a ton of talent on this Notre Dame team. Marcus Freeman, again, that's one of those top head coach coordinator combinations in the country, but the job that he's done here is undeniable. And I think Notre Dame should have been a little bit higher. Are you a believer in the Irish? Now, their schedule is not overly difficult. They've got a game against Miami that is probably going to be one of the highest rated games of the college football season. That is the same weekend as Ohio State and Oregon. So the Midwest going to be the epicenter of the college
On
football
fire.
world, as it's been
Yeah.
for the last
Yeah.
3 years. May I remind all of our friends and viewers down south. But the Midwest, the epicenter of college football, especially that first weekend in November. Your reaction seeing the Irish sitting there at 4, should they be higher, should they be lower, or is that just right for them?
I think they should have been at least 3. Like you said, just the massive amount of talent, and we've seen Marcus Freeman win in the playoff, and and take Ohio State to the final quarter, to the final drive, technically. So I don't think you can undersell the potential of Notre Dame this year. It's a different Notre Dame team than we've seen in a long time. And like you said, the schedule bodes well for them to be able to, have an 11-1 regular season, maybe at worst case. So you see an 11-1 Notre Dame, pretty much a lock for a high seed or a lower seed in the playoff, and then you've seen Notre Dame beat teams like Georgia to get to play Ohio State. So I think Notre Dame is a top 3 team easily right now. I think there's a lot to like about Notre Dame and what Marcus Freeman is doing up there.
I'm with you on the Irish, but I want to flip to the other side of that big game for the Irish to Miami, who's in a similar situation to the Irish. I think Notre Dame has the better overall roster, but I do think Miami could beat them head to head, and we will see that in South Bend against a very hostile crowd for the Hurricanes coming up north in November. But about Miami here, okay? Malachi Toney returns at wide receiver. They've also got Darian Mensah, the transfer coming in from Duke. Mark Fletcher at running back, a dynamic player. Now, they do have to replace Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor as the outside edge rushers, but Miami really stout up the middle this year. Their defensive tackles, it's going to be tough to get those in-between yards on the Hurricanes this year. And from what I'm hearing about the Hurricanes is there's a lot of belief in that building. There's a lot of confidence. Mario Cristobal, again, we saw him get his team to the national title a year ago. We saw him go into Kyle Field and beat Texas A&M. We saw him beat the Buckeyes and make that run to the national championship game, ultimately falling short. But that was the step that program needed to take to bring the U back on the map. And I think that they're there. But now, again, much like Indiana, they've got to do it again. Grant, do you think Miami is a team that can do it again? They're not facing a difficult schedule by any stretch, playing in the ACC. They have the one-game season, essentially, against Notre Dame. Win or lose, they're still in the playoff as long as they don't blunder somewhere else on that schedule. But 11-1 Miami has absolutely nothing to worry about. They may even be still fighting for top 4 seed potentially, and I would imagine at least a home playoff game with a loss to Notre Dame. But how do you evaluate the Hurricanes coming into this season with what they've lost versus what they have coming back right now?
Well, that three-headed monster of Mensah, Fletcher, and Toney is as good as any in the country, and I don't think you could undersell the potential of Miami on offense. You may be looking at more of I don't want to say a Cam Ward Miami, but this is probably a more offensively loaded Miami team, which again, like you said, it's not like there's a lot to worry about in their schedule. It's not like there's a lot to worry about as far as their seeding in the playoffs, but it may be a team that has to find their identity a little more on defense. And whether or not they do that before or during the playoffs, I think that determines how far Miami's going to go, because that defense absolutely carried them. That defensive line carried them to a national championship bid last year. So I think I think there's a little question mark there because of that defense. How are you going to rely on it? How are you going to operate that now? But with the schedule, anything can happen for Miami.
And them checking in at 7 to start the year, I'm not mad at it. I do think they should be higher, but
No.
at the same time,
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't really put up too big of a fight seeing them there at 7 because, like you were just saying, defensively, we need to see something from them defensively again, just to know that this team is still going to be balanced on both sides, or is it going to be more like Cam Ward, where it's going to be offense, 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 and then the defense just needs to get X amount of stops in the game to go ahead and win. But Grant, we continue down this AP poll, and you look at all these different Big Ten teams, all these different SEC teams, then you've got teams like Texas Tech that are sprinkled in there from the Big 12, BYU, Alabama checking in at 13. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
If you told yourself that 5 years ago that Alabama would check in at 13 in a preseason poll and Indiana would check in at 6,
Yeah.
you'd probably want to go back to bed if you were just in general back then of what in the world could have happened in that time frame. But that's the job that Kurt Cignetti has done at Indiana. And now how the SEC is shaping up, that talent is a lot more equated. That conference does have the depth, but they're just missing that top end team that the Big Ten has had in each of the last 3 seasons. So, Grant, do you see a team from either the Big Ten or from the SEC as you go down this poll that's outside of those top 7 or 8 teams that you think could make a run to get to the college football playoff for the national championship? Like, I'll go first here on this to give you a second to think, because I'm just throwing it to you on the spot for this question. But I look at a team like Oklahoma, and I think Oklahoma, their schedule is brutal. But I also look at John Mateer and thinking, okay, what could it have been last year for John Mateer? I think we're going to get that again this year. And so you have a guy like Isaiah Satenga, just a speedster. He's going to be an impact player for the Sooners. I think that Oklahoma is a team that you need to watch. I think Oklahoma, yes, they could be 8-4 or they could be 7-5, but I think they could also be 10-2 and a team that you don't really want to play come December and January when they get into the college football playoff, if they were able to make it that far. And then I look at a team like USC. The schedule sets up with their bye weeks to be a little bit more favorable to them. Yes, they start a week earlier than everybody else, so they've got that extra rest period in there. But again, they're hosting Ohio State. They don't have to go to Columbus at all, and that's something that's going to bode well for them. I do believe they have to play Penn State. Again, what's Penn State going to be under Matt Campbell? Easy schedule, favorable path to the playoff. But if USC and Oklahoma can have some things fall their direction on their schedule, their quarterbacks, Jordan Mayava and then John Mateer, both exceed expectations or even meet them because they're pretty high, I think those are two teams to watch in terms of they may not be the traditional picks from the conferences to get to the playoff. But I think if they got there, that one, things will fall in their way. But two, I don't know if you'd really want to play those teams in the playoff.
No, I agree. I agree, especially with USC. I think if they have done they have done what they've done. They've brought in talent and they've recruited extremely well on defense, particularly on the line. So if you are not Notre Dame, if USC it can become a respectable team in the trenches, especially on defense, and you combine that with, like you said, Jade Mayava and all the offensive potential that Lincoln Riley brings to a USC team, the possibilities are endless because, like you said, the schedule works out where they can afford that loss against Ohio State and still have a very good shot at making the playoff. So, USC is definitely a dark horse pick. I think a lot of people like that, also because Lincoln Riley's his seat's getting warm. So, there's a lot there at USC to for them to be a potential playoff Cinderella story, if you will. But then I guess I would go with LSU. Say what you want about Lane Kiffin, but you can't undersell what he does with his offense and with his quarterback. They always take a step forward. With Sam Levitt and guys like Caden Durham. They have the best tight end in the country, probably, with Trey'Dez Green. This is just a 6'7" monster. There's endless potential on that offense. The playmaking is unbelievable. So you combine that with the fact that they did get a couple pieces on defense, and you wouldn't expect LSU to have back-to-back years where they're really ailing on defense. LSU has a chance to leapfrog a lot of teams if they can put a couple upsets together, which Lane Kiffin can certainly do that. I think that the Tigers are a team to watch in the SEC.
It's true, and Grant, I admire how you didn't go 5 minutes on LSU out of respect for Jaden Daniels there. So that was well done, just to make sure that five stays off the show. But you look at a team like Lincoln Riley's USC Trojans, or a team like Brett Venables' Oklahoma Sooners, or let's even go with Lane Kiffin's LSU Tigers, right? If those coaches figure it out, like, that's the big question for those teams. If they can figure it out, like Gary Patterson now, the defensive coordinator for USC, if they figure it out, what could happen? What's the top end really of those programs with those coaches? And I think that's the biggest question that they have to answer, and they have opportunities ahead of them to answer it this year. And finally, Grant, to close out the show here, you know what I didn't see when I looked at this top 25? I didn't see Clemson.
No.
Has Olympus finally fallen in Clemson, South Carolina, for Dabo Swinney?
No.
Do we think that Clemson's going to be a team that can climb its way back into the poll, that they can make a push to the playoff, that they can contend for the ACC? It's not little old Clemson, but I mean, are they returning to little old Clemson? Where is the pulse on the Clemson Tigers with Dabo Swinney not making the preseason poll for the first time in over a decade?
Honestly, I think he's going to thrive on it, which usually means that Clemson, the team will thrive on it, and he's going to walk in the locker room and be like, "Guys, did you see the poll? SMU and Louisville are ahead of us in our conference. They're on the poll. We're nowhere to be seen. It's like that has to dig at Dabo. There's no way this is not just making him red right now. I think Clemson is primed to have. I don't know if it's a miracle season, but primed to have a season where they exceed expectations. Whether or not that lasts long term, like you said, Clemson has been middling for a few years now, so you wonder where they're going to be long term. But who knows what could happen this year with the way that Dabo and that team has been slighted.
It really is the truth. And that's going to be one of those stories to watch in the ACC all season, because you're seeing Louisville in the poll, you're seeing SMU in the poll. You know what Miami already brings back. Is there another dark horse in the poll? Does James Franklin have an immediate impact at Virginia Tech, where all of a sudden that they even take up some real estate that Clemson once occupied? Or does Dabo Swinney have something up his sleeve where the Tigers are going to come out of nowhere this year, contend for the ACC, and potentially be a dark horse playoff team? So all those questions that we'll figure out. But that will conclude tonight's show, wrapping up the AP poll, getting to react to it, talk a little bit about Ohio State and why they're so trusted as the number one team in the country. We will be back at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center a couple of days this week on Wednesday and Thursday. We'll get to talk to some players, and we'll have the latest from what we're hearing from fall camp later on this week. So, guys, again, we appreciate you listening to the show. Make sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel at The Silver Bulletin. We appreciate all of you guys viewing it, but our analytics are telling us that not all of you guys are subscribed. So go ahead and do that. It's completely free. And drop a like down there. Turn on the post notification. So anytime that we drop a show or bonus content or an interview, that it's coming to you first, and you guys get to be the first ones to see that, so you can watch it and share it. To keep up to date on the Ohio State Buckeyes, and then if you're listening on podcast, make sure that you're following the show there and leave us a review. Guys, on social media at TSilverBulletin, and then the website tsilverbulletin.com. Grant, where can everybody find your coverage? I know you had a great piece go out on the linebackers Monday morning. You've got one on the secondary Tuesday morning. Talk to the people about where they can find you on social.
Just search me up, Kincaid8 on all the socials.
There we go. Kincaid8 on all the socials. Mine is at Blake Biscardi. Guys, we appreciate you for following along, for listening to the show. And again, just to remind you one final time about Tailgate Takeover before we get out of here, on August 29th from 12 to 3 p.m. at Dick's House of Sport in Polaris, Ohio. We cannot wait to kick off football season with you guys. And we will see you next time. For Grant Kincaid, I am Blake Biscardi, and this has been Buckeye Cadence. We'll see you later this week. God bless.